Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal, and Season 2 content of the War Within expansion has been around for, by this point in the video, 3 weeks starting today. Or rather, we are in our 3rd week of the season, and the Mythic Plus meta, at least for the time being, is starting to solidify. It's at least beginning to, as we're starting to figure out which classes are looking really strong for this season, with them getting us a new set of Mythic Plus dungeons, new set of affixes, and new set of environments give certain classes an advantage when it comes to pushing some of the higher end content, but also means bringing certain classes into your dungeons on high level or low level. Your dungeons can actually be made just a little bit easier because certain classes do more damage, bring better utility, or are simply more survivable than anything that's available. And I wanted to highlight the 5 classes that are looking like the strongest picks for Mythic Plus as of this moment, with dungeons that are very AoE focused, where tanks are not nearly as threatened with tank busters, gives us a very interesting environment where certain class picks are beginning to show a more competitive side than everybody else. And I wanted to really highlight those 5 classes that are looking right now like the strongest picks, or rather classes that'll make your next dungeon run a little bit easier if you pick them up for your groups. As always, if you guys want to see more regular updates for the patch 11.1 Season 2 content, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe. But otherwise, let's dive right in. So as we discuss all of these classes, do remember there will likely be additional tuning over these next few weeks, but for now, if you were to lock in a snapshot of in the moment, these would be some of the top tier classes that can make it dungeon runs that much easier. One of them being a fire mage, one of the favorites for Blizz. It feels like just about every single season, every single expansion, mages find a way into the meta. Either it's frost, either it's arcane, either it's fire, but this class never seems to lose its touch season to season, except maybe like Legion for PvP for a little bit, or a good portion of it. I do remember seeing a lack of mages for a short while, but outside of that expansion, in PvE content, they're generally really good. Fire, specifically as Sun Fury, specifically as this big fire blaster build with a tier set that allows you to regain cooldown on combustion rather quickly, combined together with Unleash Inferno, means this pack constantly has damage almost at all times. It's damage that funnels a lot of single target and then kind of spreads out from that target onto everything around you, which makes them good for single target, small target cleave, massive target cleave, you name it. They're in a really good spot right now. Outside of that, having also good survivability, decent bit of utility. Like as a healer, you won't have to worry about healing them too much because they should be self-reliable for the most part. Mages are in a really good spot right now, and a really balanced DPS that brings a really good package that works out in any dungeon. It can make a lot of your dungeon experiences and escapades just that much easier. The mostly because it's the damage numbers that they have that can help support them in that type of content, but tuning can really swing things in any direction. And out of all the range classes, mages are definitely by far not the hardest hitting AoE caster class for Mythic Plus dungeons. Right now, I think that cake goes to Balanced Druid, masters of constant AoE damage. The more enemies you pull, the more damage boomkins do as they continues to cleave everything around them. Do have to trade some utility and defenses for playing a boomkin. Like you don't have a proper kick with solar beam. You have a big silence that can lock out multiple enemies, but you don't have a consistent interrupt that you could bring into the team. But you do bring other utility from ability to soothe, stampeding roar, knocking enemies around with typhoon, being able to disrupt with an incapacitating roar. Generally decent defenses with bear form, but it does lock you out on some damage, but can be good survivability wise. Things like Innervate can be very useful. Even Nature's Vigil can help out in off healing. Things like Ursul's Vortex, or you can go for the Root. So there's quite a bit of utility that you bring, but you do have to trade out for some defense and potentially for interrupt capability. But the overall AoE damage that this spec can put out is absolutely out of this world. However, I guess we should also double up Druid because it's not just balance that's actually doing well this season. I think this is the first time in this season you can probably play Feral Druid with just as much confidence as you could play a Balanced Druid, as the class of Druid in general brings great utility that is fantastic for 5-man content. And with the way that dungeons are designed right now, this actually may be the best time for Feral Druids to shine as of this moment. It can be played in place of a balance with a slight damage profile trade-off, but also utility trade-off. Now, the profile for Feral is a little bit different compared to Balance Druid. They still have huge AoE bleeds with Primal Wrath. You can put Rip on every target around you, and that Rip damage in AoE does quite a bit, very similar to Boomkin's AoE damage, though those bleeds feed you with Apex Predator's Craving, where Rip damage has a chance to proc Ferocious Bites for free, allowing you to execute fantastic, powerful single target damage to a target with a massive bite. Can be amped up with Druid of the Claw for a Ravage, which does more single target, but also cleaves everything around you. Those big bites that you could fuel into a target give you better priority damage, also splash to all enemies around you with Rampant Ferocity. For every enemy that has a Rip on them, you also, from your bites, are able to splash the damage to everybody that already is bleeding from all your damage output, which is so good. It's like a loop of abilities. Put bleeds, gives you bites. Those bites splash damage on everybody with the Rip, and it just continuously cycles back to back to back, which gives Feral slightly less AoE damage, not that much far from balance, but a better priority damage, better single target damage, better that focus damage that some groups are looking forward to. Plus, Feral brings a proper interrupt with the ability of Skull Bash, plus the rest of the Druid utility, so you're trading an AoE silence for a proper kick. You also have better defenses with Survival Instincts. It isn't as good as like pure immunities that some classes bring, but it's still very good. The only difference of Feral is they're a little bit harder to play. Your resources do regenerate a little bit slower than that of a Balance, so it's a bit of a trade-off, but this is probably one of the best seasons to play a Feral Druid if you've ever had any inclination to pick one up for War Within or any expansion for Mythic Plus specifically. They're in a really good spot, and surprisingly so. And when is the last time Feral Druid was actually somewhat of a meta or even a solid pick for Mythic Plus dungeons? The only season I can remember is the Corruption season from BFA, because they could kind of cheese the corruptions, but that was really about it. Or at least the last time I remember Feral's being mildly good. Now, another DPS spec that's really good for keys right now is Unholy Death Knight, which is pretty awesome because Unholy Death Knight gets to really shine this season, but in a very unusual, very unorthodox way. They have always had fantastic AoE damage that scales up with the number of enemies that they hit because of the way that Epidemic works. For every enemy afflicted by a Virulent Plague, you can use Epidemic to cause that enemy to burst, dealing shadow damage to themselves and all enemies around them. So for every enemy that's part of this big trash pile, that you do pretty big pulls in this season right now, for every enemy in that pool, you do more and more damage. This means the damage can really scale out of control. It is wild how strong the spec can be. So with how many big pulls you can do in the season, Unholy Death Knight ends up outputting some of the best damage out there for a melee DPS class, and lays some of the most potential damage, and it's really fun once you can really get a big pull and just start trucking everything with back-to-back epidemics. However, the profile of this season changes quite a bit, so if you're someone who was kind of getting bored of Unholy Death Knights and how they've been playing for a little bit, you wanted something fresh, something new, this could be the season for you. But it's changing in a very unorthodox way. Not only are they picking up Sunlane, which hasn't been like the meta choice for Unholy, but it's good to see it shine for once. But we're also seeing a fairly major shift in their cooldowns. Unholy normally is a master of summoning undeads. However, you give it up that entire row with Apocalypse, Maguses, and even Army of the Dead and Raise Abomination to go for more diseases, more sustained damage, more control damage, sustained damage profile, with only major cooldown really being Unholy Assault. Which does make it a little bit easier to play the spec because cooldowns, you don't have to really manage them nearly as heavily. You have actually very short cities, so you kind of just want to send them and use them as often as possible. But it's a very drastic shift in playstyle and focus, opting out for a lot of sustained damage profile over burst damage and cooldowns. You also do give up quite a decent bit of single target damage and priority damage to cleave everything around you, spreading diseases across an entire enemy squad and burning them down slowly but surely. Instead of finding one singular foe to focus down, you're looking to end an entire whole group of enemies, kind of like Arthas walking into Stratholme, diseasing the entire city. You're not focusing on specific targets, you're just kind of spreading it everywhere and letting it wreak havoc. So that's basically what Unholy Death Knights are looking to do this season. But for Mythic Plus, they also bring in great utility. Grips are awesome and can be used in Mythic Plus more than in raids, gripping enemies to destruct them, stop casts, or even just get them closer to the group as they try to leave. Some enemies do like to do that, like in the beginning of Priory when enemies leap away from the group, you can pull them back in to control them a little better. You have a blind for AoE, which is also really good. Grip with Abomination Limb to group everything up, drop down a dome of anti-magic zone to protect your allies, protect yourself with things like AMS, IBF, Lichborn, with AMS actually working pretty well for some of the bosses that do magic damage, like second boss of Rookery with the Skarden boss that passes the dot that kind of swaps from ally to ally. If you pre-AMS that dot, you just remove it out of the game, at least for that pull. So it may make it easier for your healer to deal with some of that healing output if you could chain the AMS into that dot more consistently, so you can just break mechanics for the most part as Unholy. This may change over these next few weeks. They're going to be doing more tuning most likely, but this is something that Unholy Death Knights do bring into the teams right now, which can make your dungeon runs a little bit easier. When it comes to our tanks, we have the Vengeance Demon Hunter, and I first just want to say I love the Vengeance Demon Hunter, or I guess the Demon Hunter set in general. Normally they opt out for more of this classic Demon Hunter sets that are more revealing, more leather looking, that prioritize speed, agility rather than being armored up, but this set just goes in the opposite direction, going for a full Fel Reaver set. Big fan of what they did this time around. And also it is to note here, tanks right now are a little bit volatile, especially this early in the season, and right now like any tank could really take over the #1 spot. Right now we're seeing every single tank spec, maybe like minus Brewmaster, pushing some of the highest keys available as of this moment. It's hard to tell which tank is going to take the top spot, but at least based on PTR testing, it was looking like Vengeance Demon Hunter was looking like the most consistent option, and it retained some of the popularity heading into this season. What makes Vengeance in particular very, very good is because they get to play with Eldrazi Fel Reaver, or Eldrazi Reaver playstyle. I guess I'm so used to adding Fel with Felskard being a playstyle that was popular for so long. And while not everybody's a fan of the Eldrazi, it is very consistent. Art of the Glaive plus all the other talents that it offers offer quite a significant bit of healing, making Vengeance very self-sustainable. Self-sustainable tanks in PTR were looking very, very strong, because there's a lot less tank busters this season, so tanks need to worry less about being spiked out with damage, but they need to find ways to live auto attacks, live regular hits, and the more enemies they can pull and live all of those regular hits, the better. So tanks that can heal and outlive that damage that they take are probably going to be the strongest. This means less reliance on a healer, but also means more consistent pulls and bigger pulls that you can survive every single time. And Demon Hunter was looking like the best one, with Eldrazi offering significant self-healing output. You also, since you do a lot of big pulls, as Vengeance Demon Hunter, you actually have some advantage in those specifically, mostly because you're able to go for things like Sigil of Silence to control enemies a little better, Sigil of Chains to move them all together, Sigil of Misery to destruct them for a short moment, and even stuns with Chaos Nova. You're a really, really good class when it comes to grouping enemies and controlling large packs at the same time, and Vengeance does have a slight advantage in that department specifically for this season as well. You also have good damage relative to other tanks, not the highest damage that we've seen, but generally pretty good damage overall. And good damage means you're going to be able to get through those trash packs quicker, get to the boss quicker, get through the dungeon a little bit quicker, and all of those factors is why Vengeance right now at least is looking like a tank that can make some of your dungeon ones a little bit easier, because it has good control, great survivability if you play it correctly, but also decent damage in order to take your group through the rest of the dungeon and hopefully upgrade your key to help you push further. As for healers, we're also in the same boat of volatility. Things are constantly ever-changing for now, at least in the current meta. And even though Disc Priest was not always a really strong contender within PTR, it did get better over time, and right now it's looking like a very solid choice. A very popular spec from Season 1 that continues on and keeps performing fairly well within Season 2. It did go through quite a decent bit of rework with its talent trees, but I think it ended up on top at the end of it all. They gave him better cooldown reduction with abilities like Penance, now scaling off of Haste. They also did simplify the GCDs that needed for Disc Priest in order to get their cooldowns online. Unless you're raiding with Oracle and there's a little bit of a rotational flow you have to get used to, but the Void Weaver for Mythic Plus at least does have an easier kickstart than it did before, which makes it a little bit easier to manage in Mythic Plus. Plus, giving him a talent where Smites can extend atonements in Mythic Plus, it's kind of wild because this actually will focus on the ally with the shortest atonement duration, and will try to extend those first, which allows you to really juggle atonements for a very long time, simplifying a lot of the playstyle for Disc Priest, allowing you just to spam smites in order to juggle atonements and just have a really high uptime on those, which overall makes the playstyle just more consistent and easier to manage. Disc Priests do have also a lot of damage reductions with pain suppression, as well as Dome with barrier, and even things like Lenience adding a little bit extra survivability, which are all very strong, but they do trade out on utility. This is the one healer that doesn't have much that it brings besides like PI and Mass Dispel, but you don't have things like a kick. You don't really have a lot of fast movement speed, so in some cases some of the healers can be better in that department. But this class, Disc Priest, it definitely shines when it's paired with certain other classes that can make up for those weaknesses. So if you pair him with a Boomkit, for example, or a Feral Druid that has Stampeding Roar, that gives Disc Priest a bit more mobility. If you pair him together with other classes that have plenty of interrupts, then Disc Priest doesn't have to worry about interrupts, things like that. So it's a generally strong healer, but it may need a composition in order to really fully shine. But at its peak right now, it does seem like a very popular pick for Mythic Plus. It does seem like it has some of the best throughput in the game, at least as of this moment, until we get some additional tuning. But as always though, I do want to thank all of you guys so much for watching, and hope you guys did enjoy this video. If you did enjoy it or found it informative, go ahead and give it a like. It would very much appreciated. Join our Disc community for any future class tuning or patch notes that may appear for Season 2, which we'll likely be seeing over these next few weeks. Also, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and as always, I'll see all of you guys in the next one.